Our education tonight will be presented by ARBA Hall of Fame inductee and ARBA judge, Dr. Chris Hayhow, D.V.M, Ph.D. from Ohio. Dr. Chris is the chair of the ARBA Constitution Committee and former ARBA president, along with serving on multiple ARBA committees. In Dr. Chris's professional life, he is the director of research compliance at the Ohio University in Athens, Ohio. Dr. Hayhow, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I appreciate you guys wanting to have me give you some information tonight. I hope it's of benefit. What I'm going to talk about probably is the most important thing that you'll have to work on for a successful rabbitry, even though at times it may seem mundane and not very exciting, but it is the most important thing that you'll probably have to work with. So first thing we need to think about is the rabbit itself and not us. And that's very difficult because if you walk into most rabbitries, they're designed for the people rather than for the rabbits themselves. Here in the university where I'm at, I'm also the attending veterinarian here, and everything is climate controlled. The rabbits' temperature is maintained at about 65 plus or minus 2 to 3 degrees. And the rabbits don't do much, or the other animals don't do much, but everything's climate controlled. You don't have that luxury with most rabbitries. And I say that when I say rabbitry, very few people build a building devoted solely to rabbits. Most of the time what I call retrofit. So you might have a garage where you're going to put rabbits in there, some old shed out back, a barn, whatever you're using for your rabbits, it's retrofitted, and invariably it's what's comfortable for you. So the reason I bring that up is rabbits like a temperature really of about 55 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And why is that? Because rabbits, unlike you and I, they don't sweat. They only get rid of body heat 2 ways, and that's panting, which if you think back through the summer, if you were at the fair last year and it was really hot, they open mouth breathe a lot when they get stressed, or they'll lose body heat through their ears. I've had rabbits for longer than I care to admit, and I can tell you in my whole life, I've never had an adult rabbit die in the wintertime due to cold weather. But they'll die in the summertime, and I've had that happen due to the heat. So heat's more stressful. And the key is rabbits need plenty of fresh air moving through the building so they thrive. If you'll go to the next slide, we'll talk about some of those things. Sanitation is very, very important in a rabbitry. And if you have a damp area, you're setting yourself up for disease problems. I can tell you, I won't tell you the person's name, one of our premier judges one time, I went to their house because they were going to go pick up rabbits for the national. And I said, can I come in? And they go, oh no, I have to set things up first. And they got some concrete blocks and put 2x4s on it and said, here, walk over this because there's so much water in my rabbitry. And as you can imagine, they had rabbits with colds and other things going on. So dampness in a rabbitry is very, very hard to maintain rabbits' health if you have a lot of dampness in your rabbitry. The other thing is a lot of people, especially people that have breeds that have shaded varieties, whether that's Rex with the sables and seals, or people that have mini Rex and might have blacks or the dwarf breeders, they always want to close the place up so they're not going to get sunburned. Well, that sounds all fine and dandy, but rabbits don't reproduce very well unless they're getting plenty of sunlight. And they really need about 16 hours of sunlight a day. Now, whether you're going to provide that in artificial light, but they need that sunlight, because even though we don't see it as often as we do for wild rabbits, our domestic rabbits are seasonal breeders. They breed more readily in the spring. As the daylight hours are decreasing and it's getting cooler in the fall, they don't tend to breed as well, which is what we see for the wild rabbits. So you need to think about, do they have access to plenty of light, and ideally 16 hours. The next thing is predators. You know, rabbits get frightened very easily, so we need to keep them in a safe and secure place. I'm a veterinarian, so I practiced for years, and I can tell you I went to some of the dairies and they'd have country music on. Some of the other dairies would have rock music. The key is having some noise so the animals are not going to be startled when there's something changes in the environment. And probably one of the most important things is thinking about keeping predators out. And most people don't think about people as predators, but they are. Predators, rats, mice, dogs, cats, all that can be a health hazard to the rabbits. And when I say that, I mean from those animals coming in and startling the rabbits to them bringing in diseases, whether it's rats and mice that can spread coccidia or pastorella. People can bring in some of the viruses like we're talking now out west where they have all the rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus. You can bring it in on your clothes and stuff. So when I say predators, I mean any live being that can come into your rabbitry can spread things around. So if you go to the next slide, you need to think about then, what's the ideal rabbitry? And as I said, most of us, it's a building. And why is that? It's because it's what's good for us. But the ideal rabbitry, and I can tell you, I raised rabbits and guinea pigs for years and years when I grew up. I had cages outside where I had my best rabbits, guinea pigs too, and I just put plastic on the front in the wintertime and some extra straw, and they did fine. The key though is if you have rabbits outside, you got to protect them from severe weather, and you got to protect them from the predators we just talked about, which are the dogs and cats from the neighbors and stuff. The other trade-off though is your animals tend to be healthier when it's outside because you got constant air movement. But most of the time, everybody wants their rabbits in a building because it's more enjoyable for the owner. So if you want to go out and take care of your animals, it's a lot more fun doing it when it's 70 degrees or whatever temperature than if it's 20 below and the wind's howling. So the other problem though is when you have it in a building is you have, or the advantage really is you can protect the rabbits from predators. You can keep your friends out from coming over and looking at the rabbits. If you're worried about them, you can hopefully get rid of rats and mice, and hopefully you can keep the neighbors' dogs and cats out. So that's the trade-off. You know, for me, the ideal rabbitry would be outside under a bunch of trees. But then you have to think about other issues, as we said, whether that's predators and stuff. And it may not be as nice when the weather's not ideal for you to go out and take care of the rabbits. So if you go to the next slide. So of everything I talk about tonight, number one is ventilation. And the key to good ventilation is if you ever go into a building, in fact, you think about your house right now, invariably there's ridge vents in your house, or there's ridge vents in most barns, or there's ceiling fans that are going to exhaust the air out the top. And why is that? The answer is real easy, because warm air rises, and as air rises, it's going to warm up even more. And if you ever go to your basement during the day and then go up into your attic, it might be 20 to 30 degrees different in temperature between the basement and the attic. The nice thing is you can take advantage of that in most rabbit barns, even if it's an old shed that you have out back. If you can put an exhaust fan or even a screen or something, or a vent of some type near the top of the building, bring in air if you've got a fan from the bottom, and as that air rises, it'll hold more moisture and it can exhaust out moisture. It'll hopefully going to take out any of the debris that's in the air, which is going to be dust, bacteria that are floating in the air, ammonia from the rabbit urine, which ammonia is heavy, so it's going to stay at the bottom. And all those things can be carried out through that vent if you have at the top, or if you're going to have fans pulling air out. You know, I always tell everybody, don't ever blow it, or you ideally don't want it blowing onto the rabbits. You want the fan to pull the air across the rabbits and pull it on out the building, hopefully up through the ceiling. So those are some of the things that you can do to improve the circulation. And throughout my career, whether it's rabbits, chickens, cattle, pigs, any species, ventilation is the #1 problem we see, which then leads to pneumonias and respiratory problems. And the big one, as you guys know, in rabbits is Pasteurella. You know, the snuffles, the runny eyes, the runny nose type problems that we see. So if you'll go to the next slide. One of the problems that people encounter is they go to a fair, or they go to a rabbit show, or they go to get some new stock and bring it in, and they forget that those animals may be good genetically and they may are going to be an asset to the herd, but if they have disease problems, they may not live long enough for you to reap that benefit. So you need to think about, how can you quarantine them? And when I say that, a lot of people get concerned because they don't really know what quarantining means. It's similar to what we're doing right now with this coronavirus for the people, is keep them in a separate area so they don't interact with the other animals, which is what we're doing now. We're trying hopefully not to have everybody interact to spread this virus around. So if you can find a place, whether it's a separate bank of cages, a separate building, when you bring in new animals, put them in there. Or if you get sick animals, put them in your quarantine area and then take care of them last, because you always want to take care of the healthy animals first. Because if you think about it, the most susceptible, or the animals that are most likely to get a disease, are going to be the breeding stock and the does and litters, you know, the younger animals themselves. So you want to protect them from all these other sick animals. And for a quarantine period, I tell everybody, ideally is 3 weeks. If you can do it longer, it's great, but at least 3 weeks. By that time, you should find out, or be able to find out, are these animals really healthy? And if not, then you can make a decision to get rid of them or get some different stock. Next slide. So the whole key to disease control is cleaning. And I know that's doesn't sound very exciting, but clean, clean, clean. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is get rid of any debris in the rabbitry, whether that's old rabbit feed sacks, newspapers, anything that you have laying around that shouldn't be there, because rats and mice and other critters think that's a great place for a home. Same way with putting your feed in a place where the animals can't get into it. Cleaning out the cages routinely, especially if you have stacked cages. If you start thinking about it, the one on the bottom, even if you've got good trays, tend to have stuff fall through on them. So keep the place clean and keep it well ventilated, and you'll have fewer disease problems. And as I said before, if you can keep it clean and keep it ventilated, you're probably 90% of the way of having a healthy rabbitry. Just cleaning it routinely and keeping the ventilation up. So next slide. And we talk about housing, and it depends on the breed you're talking about. Let's face it, if you're going to raise some of our big 6-class breeds, Checker Giants, Flemish Giants, you know, these breeds that have a mature weight of over 10 pounds, they don't do very well in stacked cages. That doesn't mean you can't do it, but they don't tend to thrive as well. Stacked cages are great for a lot of our smaller breeds. The only thing I would caution you on is, just like people, all animals are different. Some animals don't want to be on top. Some animals don't want to be on the bottom. They can't see as well. So you need to think about some of these animals' personalities and stuff and move them around. The other thing from that standpoint, the other thing to think about is just sanitation. If you've got one level of cages, it's a whole lot easier to keep clean than if you've got stacked cages where you have trays, and some of the animals will go into one corner or the other, so stuff may be running down on the cages. So you're going to have to constantly think about, how do I keep these clean so the animals at the lower levels aren't going to get their coats stained up and have other health issues. Go ahead, the next slide. So of everything I've said, and I always say, is this is a true false one, is disease prevention important? And the answer is obviously yes. This is true, because if you don't have healthy animals, they're not going to thrive, which means if you're raising a single fryer or a meat pen for the fair, you can't afford those animals to go off feed or get sick for a day or two. Same way as if you're going to try to show any breed and you want it to be in good coat and flesh condition and healthy, you cannot afford that animal to get sick, because then it won't show well, whether you're taking it to a fair or you're taking it to a regular ARVA show. So next. There you go. So how do you do that? And we've talked about some of those things already. I think the number one thing at the top of the list is going to be keeping the pests out. Rats, mice, dogs, cats. And that's easier said than done. I know some of my best friends that have some of the best rabbits in the country. They have an old tomcat in there and walks across the cages, and I just cringe. It just, you know, because the cats can have pastorella and give it to the rabbits, and their cats can jump down and scare the rabbits and they break their back and stuff. But, you know, if they're used to it and that's what works for them, then I'm not going to argue with it, but it's not ideal. The next thing is keeping your feed in a sealed container. And why is that? Number one is you don't want rats, mice, and other critters getting in there eating it. But number two is, you know, it's going to be fresh and it's not going to get moldy if you do that. So you're constantly turning your feed over. And I would put it in a plastic container if I could, and then constantly rotate that out. The next thing is think about keeping the rabbitry uncrowded. And I know I've had over 500 rabbits at a time, and anytime you get an empty cage, right away another animal goes in it. Well, that sounds fine and dandy, but ideally from a health standpoint, you want to have that air moving through and some good ventilation. And if you've got a crowded rabbitry and you've got a whole bunch of those and litters and stuff, the air isn't going to move as well. So you may have more health problems. And then the other thing we just kept saying is clean, clean, clean. And what do I mean by that? I would say every day, at least that's what I do, get a trowel and clean any fecal matter and urine that's stuck in the corners of the cages, or scrape the bottom of the cages. Clean the trays a couple times a week. It just depends on, for does and litters, you may have to do it every day, even at certain times. But keep the place cleaned out and keep underneath the pens cleaned out so it smells better. And take that stuff out of the rabbitry wherever it is, because that's good for compost. And then the most important thing, we already talked about the ventilation, but keeping the area dry. So if you're constantly cleaning your trays out or cleaning underneath the pens, the moisture level is going to be lower. So there's going to be less ammonia. So it's not going to be as irritating for the rabbits. And it's also not going to be as irritating for you being around all of it. So next. So, and this is always the question. People contact me constantly about how do I treat this, or what do I treat that with and stuff. And I think the first thing to think about is getting a proper diagnosis. What are you really dealing with if you have a health problem? Is it a management problem? Just like right now, most of the time, if you've got pastorella, you can treat the rabbits, but if you've got poor ventilation or the place isn't clean, they're probably going to relapse and they're going to have the problems again. Or same way, if you've got diarrhea problems, that's a management problem, and you can treat them a lot, but you've got to change your management. So the first thing I would think about is, if you're going to treat them, get an accurate diagnosis first. And then the second thing is make sure you pick the right medication, because I know people that treat their rabbits all the time for infections, and what you're doing is you're going to select for antibiotic resistance. You're going to select for bacteria that are resistant to the antibiotic you're using, and eventually it may not work, which is one of the big things we're seeing in people too right now, where we're trying to limit the use of antibiotics in some of our animals so that there's more antibiotics to use in people, because we have problems now with antibiotic use that's created resistance in people too. So it's something to think about. Next. And of all the things that people ask, these are the most common diseases that we see. So from bacteria, we're talking about the pasteurelloses, and usually that causes runny eyes, runny nose. It could cause head tilt. We also have the otitis media that's due to that nosema. And then just abscesses throughout the body. And I tell anybody this: if you're going to go to Las Vegas and gamble, If you have an abscess in a rabbit, I'd bet 98% of the time it's going to be to Pasteurella. That's the bug that is our enemy in rabbits. And the problem is it's on virtually every rabbit has Pasteurella. They've done studies where anywhere from 50 to 96% of all rabbits, if you culture them, you can grow out Pasteurella. So some rabbits, it's a normal inhabitant, and others, it can be cause a major disease. And I think the big difference is just are the rabbits healthy, and are they healthy because you've got good ventilation, good sanitation and things. So those are things you can control. And the two big viral diseases we see are the myxomatosis, which we don't have here in the Midwest, thankfully. It's more out in California on the West Coast, and it's a mosquito transmitted disease. And then the other one that we're seeing a lot right now is this rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus, or what they call it's a calicivirus. And it's a disease that until it is a foreign disease here in the US, even though we now have it. I was on the phone yesterday with some of our government officials. It's now active in 6 states right now. Recently, it jumped from the domestic rabbits to the jackrabbits and the cottontails, and it's killing thousands of wild rabbits. I say thousands because that's the number they used. They don't know how many because, you know, some of the areas we're talking about are pretty desolate in western Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, up into Nevada and Colorado, where it's pretty sparsely populated with people, but there's a lot of rabbits there, and it is killing those animals. Right now, we have no vaccine that's licensed for use here in the US, but some states are allowing importation by select veterinarians to bring that vaccine in here. And whether it's practical to use, I don't know. I've heard anywhere from $20 to $50 a dose for the vaccine. And that sounds like a lot to me. And the other part is will it even work with the isolate we have here in the US? And the thought is, yes, it will, but there's no guarantee. And the other thing that's not a guarantee is how long will that, if you vaccinate your rabbit, how long will it be protected? The other things rabbits can get, just like you and I, they can get fungal infections. They can get parasites. Now, the only parasite is at least internal that we think is much of a problem in rabbits are the coccidia, which usually that's a young rabbit. You know, I say young, 4 months of age or less, that causes diarrhea and problems like that. But rabbits can get other parasites such as fleas, ticks, termites, things like that. And then we have a lot of non-infectious diseases rabbits get, such as ketosis, which is pregnancy toxemia, you know, when the doe's getting close to having babies and they'll just die and stuff. So lots of diseases. If you guys are going to have that for your fair project, there's lots of diseases you can talk about. Next. So I wanted to end talking about the feed, because I hear a lot of people think that the feed's the cause of all the problems, and it might be, but I think more it's how we feed the rabbits are the problem. And rabbits can thrive on 10 to 12% protein. I mean, you start thinking about wild rabbits out there, you know, they just go pick and choose whatever's there, but most of the time, minimum 16% protein, at least for rabbits that we're trying to push and to grow so we can show them at a fair or an ARBA show is about right. Fat, you know, it's the minimum's 3.5%, and the fat's not there for much energy. It's there more to hold the pellet together. It's a binder. And then fiber, I have on here 15% minimum, 20% max. There's feeds out there with more fiber in them. The big thing to know is if you get fiber really much less than 15% and absolutely less than 10%, you're going to have more intestinal problems, more enteritis, and more diarrhea. But I think the big thing is how you feed the rabbits so you don't overfeed them. So you want to go to the next slide. And that is, you know, I'm a big proponent. I'm not, you know, I'm not a chemist by training, and I'm not going to go sit there and go, oh, we should feed, there's a little oats, here's a little barley, here's some sunflower seeds, some soybeans. You know, we have some very, very good national associations that have rabbit pellets that are ideally balanced. And you really don't need much supplementation with those. Now, that being said, you're surely going to feed a herd buck very different than a growing rabbit or a doe and litter, because they have different energy requirements. So you have to manage that and make sure you don't overfeed them. I tell everybody this, and it's not funny, dead rabbits don't grow very well. And a lot of people think the more and more you push them when they're young, well, we'll be able to show them quicker, and then they get diarrhea and die. So I tell everybody the best thing to do is bring them on slowly. Limit feed them early, then gradually increase it, which means you may not get them to the show as fast, but at least they'll be alive. The other thing is if you're going to be pushing them, you need to make sure there's some fiber in their gut to keep things moving through. And I tell everybody straw, not hay, definitely not alfalfa hay, because all you want the fiber for is the fiber itself to keep their gut moving. And straw is the cheapest. So that's one thing that I would advocate, is giving them straw periodically, even if it's not every day, but every few days, just for fiber. I raised Angoras for years and stuff, and other breeds. And, you know, if you're noticing a lot of fur in their droppings, a lot of people will feed them papaya tablets. I know when my kids were young, they'd go around and give their rabbits the papaya tablets. They'd eat it right out of their hand, or we'd just put it right on top of the feed. So that's something to think about to keep their intestines moving, okay? The big thing is, if you're feeding a well-balanced ration, your rabbits don't need much supplementation. And I say that with all honesty, because invariably, and I judge quite a bit, you'll handle rabbits and you'll say they're soft. And people will say, well, I'm feeding them this and this and this and this and this. And I tell them, you're probably killing them with kindness. You're giving them too much energy, and they're just going to lay down body fat, and they're not going to be firm. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't supplement. I know lots of people that supplement with oats and barley and calf manna and those things all the time, and they do very well. But each rabbit's an individual, just like people are. And some people can eat more and not gain weight, and some people can eat just a little bit and gain weight. So you have to monitor each rabbit individually. So I think that's it. If you'll go to the last slide here. Yep. And I tried to bring you folks some comments to think about here and some ideas. I hope you picked up something. I'll be glad to try to answer any questions. I think the big thing is ventilation and sanitation are key. And they may not sound really exciting, but I think that's the key to keeping your rabbits healthy and having a good building. I mean, even when you get in there in this summer and it's hotter than the blue blazes and smells bad in there, then you're going to realize what I'm saying, or put in a vent up in the ceiling so the warm air goes out, and you want to be in there. So I don't know if I touched on what you wanted tonight, but if you have any questions, please fire away and I'll see if I can answer them.